The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. For obvious reasons, over the 17 years of our show, we focused on a lot of different issues. America has been rocked by a grand jury report that details allegations of child sex abuse by Jerry Sandusky, a former football coach at Penn State. Of course, the justice system has to run its course before the case can be prejudged. But the entire scandal has brought to light not only a number of legal questions, but also the nature of child sexual abuse and how it was or was not handled by Penn State officials when it was or was not brought to their attention. We have a couple of experts in the studio to help us sort the entire issue out. Please join me in welcoming the Assistant Executive Director of Clinical Programs at the Kingsbridge Heights Community Center, which has a program that focuses on child abuse, Ms. Billy Jones-Mulrain. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. And also a well-known attorney. He's been on our show before. He's also a professor of criminal justice and business at Monroe College. Joey Jackson with Kohler and Isaacs is the firm you work for.
Indeed.
Thank
Pleasure,
you for
Gary.
coming back to the program. Let's start with you, Ms. Mulrain. Before we even get into some of the real issues that you work with every day, let's lay out the circumstantial case. This is going to be something he doesn't like to hear.
Okay.
But the circumstantial case, before we bring in our defense attorney, what about what we've read in the news makes this a classic sort of child abuse case?
Well, you know, I think one of the things that's classic that we typically see is that, you know, children are always taught to trust the people they know. You know, we teach them about stranger danger. So here's a person who was trusted by children, and I am sure they were told never to question this person who was an authority figure, who you know, was a coach with a prestigious institution. And so what you see is a set of conditions that are set up, and how we teach and socialize children to deal with adults in their lives. And we don't really prepare children to know that it might be someone that they know who could do them harm.
In addition to the potential that this might have actually happened, I'm using my words very carefully, Mr. Attorney, but the fact that this certainly could have happened and some of the allegations might be true, the other disturbing aspect of it is how it was, or as I said at the introduction, was not reported or dealt with.
Right.
Why are these kinds of things often in that category, that something terrible happens? You get robbed, you know, at gunpoint in the street, you're going to run to the police and tell them. God forbid something happens to you in this realm, there's a whole different way that this is reported. Lay out for us what the typical situation is in those cases.
I think what tends to happen is that child sexual abuse is still a problem that's invisible, despite the fact that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused in the United States. I think it's something that people don't like to talk about. I think for young boys in particular, there's a lot of shame and what that might mean because they were sexually abused. And we know that children, really 2/3 of children don't report that they were sexually abused while they're young.
How do we know that? You know, again, that's proving the negative.
Yes.
How do we know that, or what gives you that idea?
I guess some of the idea that I have is from experience that we tend to see a lot of disclosures in late adolescence and even sometimes in adults. In the program that we work in, we have parents who disclose that they were abused because their children were abused and had never told before.
So this is one generation, of course,
yes.
leads to the never-ending cycle, as it were. And I'll just add, and now we're going to turn to Mr. Jackson, I'll just add that there was the story now that one of the alleged victims is being bullied in school because people are resenting the fact that this youngster may be out there doing something that's going to cause harm to the Penn State football program and, of course, the highly regarded Joe Paterno. All of those factors contribute to holding somebody down from coming forward.
Yes, absolutely. There is often a sense of lack of safety depending on who your abuser is. And also, I think some of the media coverage and how it's becoming easier to identify who the victims are, which is very unfortunate.
So that if somebody comes out, it's really because of the way the media is. It's only a matter of time before that person is identified.
Perhaps, yes.
All right, Mr. Jackson, you never prejudge a case. I know that sometimes it just seems so obvious that something has happened. There is this extensive grand jury report detailing some very serious allegations. Which aspect of this for you seems most disturbing, or are you just taking a step back right now and saying, you know what, everything is on the table, it's possible that this entire thing is made up? What's your perspective on what you've read and heard?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, Gary, thanks for having me on. Appreciate being here, appreciate being with you, and thank you for educating me and us, as you have, about the horrific statistics. Those are horrible. All right, this case is bad all the way around, Gary. From a defense attorney's perspective, there are problems, and I'm going to tell you why. In any instance where you might have, for example, an isolated allegation, it becomes just that, an isolated allegation. It's a person, a single individual who's making an accusation, and then, of course, it has to be proven. In this case, Gary, what you have is a grand jury investigation. Now, let's explain that. What happens is that a grand jury convenes, right? That's a body of individuals who convene, generally 23 people, which would constitute a grand jury, and they would convene and they would make findings and they would make certain recommendations. What happened here is that you had a multi-year investigation and you had information presented to a grand jury about potential misconduct here, okay? Let's be clear on the parties and the participants. You have Jerry Sandusky. He was this defensive coordinator who left Penn State in 1999. He's the one who the most serious of allegations are being leveled against, all right? But he, however, Gary, is not the only offender here. He's the person who apparently...
Potential offender.
Right, exactly.
My friend Joey
right. The potential, the alleged, all right, the person who these allegations are against. Now, he's not the only one. In the grand jury report, it lists 8 different victims. And the problem that he's going to have, let's talk about him first. The problem you have is that you have victims, alleged victims, who he engaged or is alleged to have engaged in misconduct towards. And they're very serious. You talk about their instances of all types of, anal intercourse, oral types of suggestions of things that he was doing. And that gives you pause as a defense attorney. But not only were the victims, who were young at the time, 10, 11 years old, and he apparently followed them around until they were older boys, but there's corroboration in that parents, for example, one parent in particular happened to have made an observation that their son came home and their hair was wet. Well, what is my son coming home with the coach and his hair is wet? Learning then that the son apparently took a shower. And based upon that, she, of course, called, the parent did, and found out that they took a shower together, thought that was inappropriate, thought that was untoward, shouldn't have happened, and an investigation ensued. There were a number of times that happened. But when you look at the grand jury report in terms of the victims and the allegations as far as what he was doing, if you look at victim number 2, for example, Gary, where it's alleged that a coach came in at the time, and a coach who came in on apparently what was going on saw what was happening. Now, he's been under attack. It's McQueary, you might recall.
Of course, Mike McQueary.
Mike McQueary is under attack. Sure. And he alleges very specifically that he saw anal intercourse occurring with this child. Hate to say it, it's horrific, shouldn't come out of my mouth, but that's what's in the report. And he says that he saw Mr. Sandusky engage in this conduct, right, with this other person. He then goes and reports it. And so not only do you have specific instances with the 8 victims who detail specific conduct or alleged misconduct, but you have corroboration. There's another coach in here who happens to have seen something amiss when he comes into a locker room and sees him frolicking around with a child.
So if you're presented with this case on the side, let's say you're being the person who's you're the attorney for Mr. Sandusky, okay? are you saying, you know what, let's cut our losses because this is a slam dunk? Or are you saying, you know what, we're going to start from a point of innocence and try and get you off?
Well, you always want to, try to start from a point of innocence. But the problem, again, as I mentioned at the outset, is that in a normal course of events, in a typical allegation, you might have one person. If I could draw a brief analogy, you have right now at Syracuse, right? You have an assistant basketball coach, Mr. Fine, who allegations are being made against. Two people are making allegations against him. They happen to be related, these two people, okay? They're two brothers making allegations against him concerning something he did of an abusive nature towards them a long time ago. Now, in that instance, where you have those two people coming out on the tail end of what's happening at Penn State, you have no other corroboration, okay? Now there's room for pause, and there's room to question why they would be doing this. What is the hidden motivation? Is there anybody else who can prove or disprove it? That's a different case, Gary. Because here you have not only two people, but you have a panoply of people coming out. You have the 8 victims of the grand jury. You have 10 others who are alleged to be coming forward now, and it's just a mess. So as a defense attorney, you cut your losses, or at least attempt to.
Ms. Mulrain, when this idea of copycat cases are all of a sudden coming out, of course you work in this realm all the time. Do you put credibility in those, or are you also somewhat skeptical and say, you know what? Somebody has a motive here, because why now, whatever it is, 25 years after allegedly something happened in Syracuse, all of a sudden they're coming out. What's your sense of what we're hearing now based on your experience at Kingsbridge Heights Community Center?
Well, I think oftentimes what does happen is that I think in general, as the story has been in the press
changed,
right, that more people are going to disclose abuse in general, and most programs will see spikes. Most programs, there's a men's program, 1 in 6, for example, a national organization. They've gotten a lot more calls and emails. Kingsbridge Heights Community Center.
You have seen more.
Yeah, we've gotten
Very
a few calls.
That's
so
fascinating.
it's pretty. I mean, like I said, it's an invisible problem that's underreported. So I think it's actually typical when these things happen for people to call. And so I don't want to talk specifics about the Syracuse case, but I know with Penn State they have been encouraging victims to come forward.
When you get notification, or a child comes into the program, or a family is recommended to the program, and you become aware of it, how far do you have to go to report it, number one? And then number two, are you satisfied that the various powers that be in the Bronx, which is where you work, deal with this adequately, and that the person, if there is somebody who's done something, actually goes to jail or pays the appropriate penalty? And that, of course, is directly related to what Mr. Jackson was talking about.
Typically, when children come to our program, they probably have gone through perhaps a legal process, whether it was reported to the New York State Central Register, whether the Administration of Children's Services may have attention on the family. In addition, many of the children, when we see them already, there's criminal cases in action, and there are family court cases in action. But there are times when we may suspect abuse, or a child is referred to us, and we're not sure who the perpetrator is. Once we find out, we do.
Are you required to report it to authorities, or is there a kind of a litmus test where you say, well, now we can report it, but we didn't have to report it right away?
No, I mean, all the therapists in our program are mandated reporters, so anything that we have reasonable cause to suspect, we report.
Which brings us right back to this case, because not only is Mr. Sandusky being looked at, but Mike McCreary, and then of course we go up to Joe Paterno. Are they in some exposure now? Are they in some danger?
I think so. I think criminally, Gary, in addition, not only to the criminal, but there's a civil side, and that represents lawsuits that might take place. And now remember that McQuarrie in 2002, when he saw this alleged incident taking place, he went and he, of course, told his father first, and then subsequent to that, the day after, which I think was a Sunday morning, he went and spoke to Joe Paterno. Joe Paterno exercised his discretion and immediately reported it to the athletic director, Tim Curley, and there was a subsequent meeting that is thereafter he reported it to Tim Curley Paterno. They called in, Curley and Schultz, the vice president, called in McQuarrie, and they said, hey, what happened? And that led to the perjury charges that are now being leveled against McQuarrie as well, against Schultz as well as Curley.
What is disturbing to me, and maybe to our friend Billy Jones Mulrain, is I'm waiting for you to say, and somebody picked up the phone and right away called 911.
Right.
This, is there some exposure for them that legally they're required to report?
Yes.
This?
Well, let me just address this. First of all, I think that the major cover-up, I think it has a lot to do with the program itself, college athletics, the importance of it, the significance of it, the money-making of it.
And what our friend here said, that there's a reticence to report something if you respect somebody, if it's a respectable person in society, et cetera, et cetera.
But what they tried to do, they being Tim Curley, the athletic director, and Mr. Schultz, the vice president, and the vice president, by the way, Mr. Schultz, is in charge of the university police. And so what they tried to do was to poo-poo it. Now, why are they being charged with perjury? They're being charged with perjury because McQuarrie says in no uncertain terms, I told them about oral sex, I told them about anal intercourse, I told them all these things. And what are they saying? No, he said it was simply horseplay. They were fooling around. And in the grand jury report, 23 pages, they found Mr. McQuarrie to be a very credible witness. They found Mr. Schultz, on the other hand, in addition to Tim Curley, to be misrepresenting things. And as a result, they're saying they perjured themselves with regard to just saying it was horseplay and not specific sexual misconduct, as McQuarrie told them.
I want to go to the telephone, but I want to ask you one question, which I know is burning in the minds of many of our viewers. As a defense attorney, was it, legal suicide to put Sandusky on the telephone with Bob Costas?
Absolutely.
And he said things like, I have done some of those things. I've horsed around with kids. I've showered after workouts. I've hugged them, and I've touched their leg, which I was like, under what circumstance did that happen without intent of sexual contact? You're saying from a legal perspective,
that should not have happened.
Should not have happened.
Now, I understand what the defense is trying to do because he's been savaged in the media. Okay,
so they
he's been declared guilty. But him talking his way out of it actually, I think, leads to more culpability. He's admitting he touched them. He's saying it's horseplay. Clearly, that's inconsistent from what the grand jury said.
If you're a prosecutor, that what I just read is Exhibit A.
100%.
And also, his description there is very consistent with what pedophiles and perpetrators do to groom children. So it's sometimes they do things gradually. So with the horseplay and things like that. So that when I heard that, that's what I thought about.
Maybe not necessary to say, but I just find this whole dialogue so disturbing. It's just, and I'm sure we all do, but I just had to weigh in with that. It's Mark from Pelham Parkway with us. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Gary. Gentlemen, and I'm sorry. I'm a little tired. You'll have to forgive me.
Just say hello. It's fine.
Happy Thanksgiving to all. First of all,
thank you.
Gary, don't cut me off. I don't have a question because if these people had the answers to my question, they'd be sitting.
Mark,
in the
it's only how long you go. That's when I'll cut you off.
When
it's
enough, and then you can take it from there. Why does this surprise you? The Catholic Church has been going through with it for 30 years. You've had Orthodox rabbis that have been arrested, Protestant ministers. And look on the other side of the world. Look at all these. Look at Uganda and Africa, where they kidnap children and rape them into submission, so they fight for them. I think as a civilization, it's a disgrace to call ourselves humans, and in this day and age, have things like this happen, where they put profit in front of everything, and even children. They knew about it. The Catholic Church has known about it. The rabbinical societies have known about it, and they condone it. And then they get up on a Sunday morning, and they say how God is all this, and we look at it, and people still tolerate it. And as long as we tolerate it, I am telling you now, as a civilization, we're a disgrace. Because there's intelligent life out there watching us.
Mark, we're about to cut you off. You made your point. Thank you very much. This brings up this whole realm, which you work in all the time. Characterize what he said in the context of what you see and hear every single day. I mean, this is extremely disturbing. Maybe on the other side of it, this whole thing coming to light puts more focus on it, and we have a way of getting to the bottom of it. Your thoughts?
Right. I think having more attention to the issue is very important. It's just that, you know, my concern with some of the attention is that I think the victims have gotten lost in some of this. But, you know, I think it's true. I think that there have been a lot of evidence of child sexual abuse. And again, it's like when you think of 1 in 4 of the female population and 1 in 6 of the male population, we're talking about
an immense problem that's been...
and it's staggering. But
well, let me ask you something specific that relates to this case and is now relating to the fact that the victims are the alleged victims are coming out in their families. Do you recommend to somebody who may have appears to you to have been abused, that they come out and suffer the indignity of having to talk about it in court? Or is there sometimes that, you know what, for you, it's better that we let authorities deal with it and we're not going to put you on the stand where maybe there'll be people cross-examining you and asking you details that you don't want to deal with? I guess that's part of what makes this so difficult. What do you normally recommend?
Well, I think one of the things to highlight, and this is where you see the differences with Penn State, most victims of child sexual abuse, that nothing often happens, so there are no criminal proceedings. So
what do you mean nothing happens from a legal perspective?
Yeah, nothing happens from a legal perspective typically. And so I think sometimes when you hear victims and survivors talking about these kind of cases, sometimes they would say, gee, I wish my circumstances got this kind of attention. So I'm not really, I have not had much experience with dealing with victims or survivors and whether, you know, they deal with some of the legal perspective, because that has not been an option.
Let me ask our experienced attorney here. If you have a alleged victim on the stand, it can work against you if you start grilling them, because then all of a sudden you look really like you are heartless. What is the legal strategy in this, and how far do you go in grilling somebody, and who's going to do the right thing by having somebody like that potentially testify?
Okay, well, a couple of things. I think that you can use a victim not testifying and not having to relive the horrific nature of the abuse as leverage to perhaps get a plea disposition. And what I mean by that is, if you're trying to cut your losses and resolve this in a favorable way for the client, remember, each count of these felony counts of this whole, you know, indecent sexual misconduct, and it carries 20 years. And so if you're looking as a bargaining chip to say, look, we want to spare the indignity of the victims to have to relive this, to have these embarrassing revelations to come out, you can potentially go to the DA and say, look, we'll cut a deal. Now, that being said, if the DA says no when you go forward, then you have an obligation as an attorney to elicit specific facts, to talk about why this didn't come out. Why did you wait? What was the essence? Did you report it to someone at home? Did you talk to the police? Did you talk to anybody about it? Because you have an obligation as an attorney to cross-examine on factual matters.
But fascinating the way you just described that, but initially you might even bail out of that to begin with, because even you would rather not have to go through with
and
it.
Juries hate it. I mean, you're going to look, you know, this is conduct that's deplorable. And I think your caller Mark, in his recitation of what bothered him, you know, he really tapped into a well. People do not like this. This is horrific misconduct. And you, Gary, you said too, you feel uncomfortable talking about this. This is bad. So a jury is certainly not going to be appreciative that a victim is having to talk about these things.
Explain to me what the legal process is going to be now. In other words, who's going to get brought out first? Is this going to now drag on, unfortunately, in the media for now, 5 years before anybody actually sits on the stand? What's really going to happen here? And of course, as I said that, Ms. Mulrain was like, this makes it more horrific for the victim, because they can never put it past them. It just lives on and on.
Well, the answer is it depends. First of all, I think Mr. Sandusky, it depends upon what he does. Now, will his attorneys go into the DA and try to cut their losses and fashion a plea that gets rid of this quickly and lets the victims go, alleged victims go and live in peace? If that's the case, then the case will be resolved rather quickly. So, too, with those charged with perjury, Mr. Schultz and Mr. Curley. So it depends upon what the client, the defendants, want to do in this case. If they they want to drag it out, Gary, you know it's America. They're entitled to a trial. And what will happen is before the trial happens, there'll be a number of pre-trial things that happen. Discovery will be exchanged, such as police reports that they have will be given to the defense attorneys, other information, conversations, investigations, statements will be given, and then there'll be a public spectacle. And then after the criminal trial resolves itself with a jury impaneled, sitting in judgment of all of the people who were accused, then there will be civil proceedings because people who were abused will try to get money, and they should rightfully be entitled to that.
And where will Joe Paterno be in all of this? And I should add, before I let you answer, that it was very interesting that he apparently sold his house, so now all of a sudden he doesn't have that as equity in his own financial portfolio.
True. I think where he stands, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The first thing is that he's not being charged with any crime. He's being charged with really a moral failing here, an ethical lapse. That is, should he have done more? Could he have done more?
I need you to talk quick because we want to let them.
Of course. And as a result of that, I think he has civil liability because they'll be after him for money. Now, him letting his house for $1, selling it to his wife, that could be, deemed problematic, but he did it before he actually was fired. He thought he would be able to live out the year and then ultimately resign at the end of the year. So we'll see.
But that is suggestive, and somebody who is prosecuting something like that would look at that and say, hey, you knew that and he's already made some statements saying, I wish I had done more. I want to wrap it up with our friend from the Kingsbridge Heights Community Center from a Bronx perspective. Talk to me, who should know about the program, the wonderful program that you have there? Who should avail themselves of their services? And of course, I will add on, anybody who has any suspicion at all or any concerns should immediately, if nothing else, pick up the phone and call you folks. So you have the floor. Lay it out for the people of the Bronx.
So our program, we service any child in the borough of the Bronx. We are a long-term free program. We don't accept insurance, no sliding scale, so nobody is ever turned away based on ability to pay. So anybody who has experienced any kind of child sexual abuse.
Or somebody, let me just add, somebody who might have seen or suspects it might have happened, because as we have said, often the victims don't, and they may be too young, but they don't bring themselves to the fore.
I mean, in a situation like that, it would be better for parents and guardians to call, because I don't want anybody to call us thinking that we will report something. If some adults suspect or see abuse, they need to report it to the New York State Central Register. They need to report it to the police before they would, report to us.
But you will be there to support and guide and advise and all those kinds of things.
Yes, as we've been doing.
And now, did we put a phone number up? You want to call out a phone number?
Okay. So the phone number, if you want to call our program for services, is 718-884-0700, extension 193.
Okay.
And that's our intake and referral
when
line.
necessary, when appropriate, I'm sure I don't even have to ask, everything is confidential.
Everything is confidential.
And certainly you can find a friend to talk to to help sort out some issues.
Yes.
Joey Jackson, always a pleasure to have you,
Gary.
and your expertise is welcome. And say hello to all our friends at Monroe College.
Indeed, I will.
Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our show. Archives of Bronx Talk available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk. It's on the right-hand navigation bar. Next week, we'll acknowledge World AIDS Day with an update on HIV and AIDS in the Bronx. And then the week after, December 5th, should be a special night as we feature the new film about Big Pun and his legacy in the Bronx, with some special guests on the show as well. Should be fascinating and interesting and part of the culture of our borough. Bronx Talk, that's what we do. Monday nights at 9 here on BronxNet, Cablevision Channel 67, Verizon Fios 33. Thanks to producer Jane Folloro, director Michael Arias, our cast of thousands up in the booth and around us, and to you, good night. Stay there, don't get up.
Coming home can be hard if you're a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan. You may feel like you're all alone. but you're not alone. At IAVA.org, your fellow vets are all around you. Join our free online community, get the resources you need, and connect to other vets who know where you're coming from. IAVA.org. We've got your back.